Everybody.
Sorry.
That's okay. Um, Welcome everybody to this webinar. We're gonna just wait a few minutes to give everybody a chance to join the webinar. The title of the webinar is Innovative Approaches for Environmental Peace Building. And we have our four participants here: Lydia Millar, Agnes Berner, Armel Nganzi, and Emily Sample. And as I say, we're just going to wait a moment or two to ensure that everyone has a chance to join us. My name is Chris Huggins. I'm an associate professor at the University of Ottawa. And for those of you who are able to join us in Ottawa next week, the in-person conference is happening, of course, the 16th and the 19th. And I look forward to meeting you there. And it's going to be a very exciting series of panels and events. But in the meantime, the virtual day is also proving to be extremely interesting. So I hope that you're joining other sessions as well. Okay, we have 19 participants. I'll see if we have more than that registered. So I'll see if the numbers go up slightly before we get started. Okay, we're over the 20 mark, so I'm going to get started. So it's my great pleasure to introduce the participants, the presenters in this session on innovative approaches to environmental peace building. I'm going to introduce each of them, give a short bio for each of them in the order in which they're going to present. But of course, they can introduce themselves as well once they start the presentation. So in a few moments, we're going to have Lydia Millar starting us off. Lydia is a PhD researcher at Queen's University Belfast. She's working on her thesis entitled Witnessing Conflict-Related Environmental Harm, the Usefulness of Open Source Information in Documenting Environmental Harm for the Purposes of Transitional Justice. She's also the manager of the School of Law's Digital Investigation Lab, having previously supervised Global Legal Action Network's Open Source Investigations Clinic. Then we're going to have Agnes Berner, who recently completed her master's degree. Congratulations, Agnes, in GIS and remote sensing at the Department of Earth and Environmental Sciences at Lund University in Sweden. She is part of the university's Critical Physical Geography Research Group and an associated researcher with the Eco-Syria project, which explores the convergence of war, politics, and environmental challenges in North and East Syria. She holds a degree in geography and politics from the University of Glasgow. Kudos, I also went there. And she previously worked in Scotland's third sector, researching fuel poverty and the green energy transition. Her research interests lie at the intersection of energy, infrastructure, environment, and conflict, drawing on a combination of research methods from the natural and social sciences. Third, we're going to have Armel Nganzi Kopialo, who is a development consultant and project manager based in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the DRC, specializing in natural resource governance and artisanal and small-scale mining. He currently works for Impact, which is headquartered right here in Ottawa, overseeing policy analysis, critical mineral strategy, stakeholder engagement, and private sector partnerships. For several years in Eastern DRC and the broader Great Lakes region, he has supported conflict mediation, OECD due diligence implementation, the ICGLR regional certification mechanism, operationalization, and capacity building for miners and private sector actors, interventions directly reducing resource-driven violence. Originally from the Central African Republic, he holds a background in geology and has contributed to research and policy on mining governance and community livelihoods in the Great Lakes region. Last but not least, we're going to have Dr. Emily Sample, who's Director of Research, Evidence, and Learning at the Alliance for Peacebuilding. She earned her PhD from the Jimmy and Rosalind Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution at George Mason University. Previously, she worked at the Fund for Peace as a programs director. She co-founded the Women's Caucus of Genocide Scholars and has spoken and published widely on topics of environmental peace building and mass atrocity prevention. Her research spans climate change adaptation, environmental justice, gender, and mass atrocity prevention. Her book, Building Peace in America, was published in August 2020. So welcome, everybody. I'm going to invite Lydia, first of all, to share your screen and give us your presentation for about 15 minutes, please.
Yeah, hello everyone. Sorry, just bear with me while I get this presentation up. So, there we go. Can you all see that okay? Yep, all good. Okay, so as Chris said, my name's Lydia Millar, and I am in my final year of my PhD at Queen's University Belfast. I'm from Belfast, and I'm delighted to be able to join today virtually. I wasn't able to make it next week to Ottawa, so I'm delighted to be here virtually. It's a great way to enable people to still participate when they can't travel, so that's great. So just to get stuck into it, there we go. Sorry, wrong slide. I'm going to talk to you today about documenting environmental harm in armed conflict, reimagining accountability through open source investigations. And this is taken from my doctoral thesis, and perhaps slightly anticlimatically, there's actually no real results to this just yet, because as I say, I'm in my final year and I'm just drawing up the results from my studies now. So, but I'll still be able to give you like a good overview of what my research is, and hopefully it'll be of some interest to you all. So, yep, to get stuck in, my thesis asks a deceptively simple question. When armed conflict destroys the environment, how do we document the harm to prove it happened in the first place? The destruction of the natural world during war has long been documented sporadically, in a fragmented way and under the weight of political sensitivity. And my research argues that open source information and investigations is beginning to change that, and I want to set out a framework for testing whether it can. So firstly, we're going to talk about the conflict environment nexus. What are the links there? So war is a human-induced crisis with devastating long-term consequences for the environment. Take, for example, the destruction of olive groves and orchards in Gaza, the unexploded munitions littering the fields and forests of Ukraine, the slaughter of mountain gorillas in the eastern Congo, and the toxic legacy of oil fires in Syria. Armed conflict leaves a permanent scar on the landscape and biodiversity of affected states. And this relationship isn't incidental, it's structural. It can be expressed as three statements. The environment may be a cause of conflict, it may be a victim of conflict, and environmental harm itself is actually a barrier to lasting peace, hindering recovery long after the fighting stops. And if environmental harm is a structural dimension of the conflict, then remedying it falls squarely within the mandate of transitional justice, which is the more broader field that my work is situated in. So what is transitional justice? So transitional justice is the set of strategies a society adopts to address widespread or systematic human rights violations from its past by way of criminal prosecutions, reparations, truth commissions, institutional reform, or a combination of these things. Its purpose is accountability, justice for victims, and reconciliation. And despite this, and its transitional justice expansive mandate and comprehensive toolkit, transitional justice has largely treated environmental harm as peripheral. It's something marginal to official narratives of conflict, and a low priority in establishing legal accountability. And Eliana Casado describes this as the marginalizing of slow and structural violence in international law. So the problem I want to foreground is this. Even where the links between ecological destruction and armed conflict are now recognised, there is no systematic method of documenting that harm. And without systematic documentation, you cannot attribute responsibility and you cannot pursue a remedy. So, this is where my methodology begins. Recent scholarship argues that those seeking accountability for conflict related environmental harm should turn to open source information tools to complement traditional research methods. Open source information, or OC, as I'll call it for the remainder of this presentation, is any information that is available on the internet. And this includes from public websites, databases, and social media platforms. But in practice, this also means newspapers and social media, public records, court filings, census data, academic and commercial publications, and crucially, satellite imagery from providers like Planet Labs, Sentinel Hub, and Google Earth. So historically, documenting wars' environmental impacts has been ad hoc. It has been fixated on the most extreme acute spectacles, like the oil wells set alight during the Gulf War. But the slower and more pernicious harms, environmental harms, are often ignored for want of knowledge, funding, or political will to confront accountability for military action. However, over the past 5 years, the picture has been transformed by novel technologies and open access to data. So there's an organization called Forensic Architecture whose work is really interesting, and I would recommend participants take a look at their work. But their investigation into genocide in Gaza used satellite imagery and vegetation indices to show the widespread destruction of farmland. And it showed that roughly 40% of agricultural land and nearly a third of greenhouse infrastructure were raised or have been raised during the conflict. And Wim's Weichenberg's work for Bellingcat has tracked Yemen's disappearing date palms and makeshift oil refining in Syria. So the evidentiary value of open source investigations is increasingly clear. What has not been tested, however, is its value for accountability for conflict-related environmental harm, whether this evidence can travel into justice processes. And that untested gap is at the heart of my thesis. However, it is worth noting that the International Criminal Court has recognised the use of OC, as seen in a couple of cases, including the Al-Farfali case, where they used satellite imagery to document a war crime. But it just hasn't been used to evidence conflict-related environmental harm yet at the level of like the International Criminal Court. So, introducing Wizen. My empirical case study is the Conflict and Environment Observatory's database, Wizen, which stands for the Wartime Incidents to Environment database, which was launched in May this year. So Wizen documents near real-time and long-term environmental risk and harm following damage to environmentally hazardous sites. It currently covers Ukraine comprehensively, has been tested for parts of Sudan, and has most recently been deployed for the conflict in Iran and the Middle East. The Conflict and Environment Observatory's ambition for it is to become a global database, a go-to resource for the environment and war, in the way that ACLED and UCDP are for political violence. So CEOBS notes that wizen, which is in itself an old verb, to become wise, in Middle English, is to advise, to instruct, and to illuminate a route. And that ambition matters for my framework because it is making a claim not just about data, but about accountability. So how does Wizen work? Wizen is structured across 3 tiers of increasing depth. Level 0 is about breadth. A flag that a facility in a war zone has been damaged based on satellite imagery alone, generating a theoretical environmental harm score from the site's risk profile and vulnerability, such as whether the facility is a petrochemical facility, a school beside a petrochemical facility, or just your regular school or hotel that's not beside any particularly risky site, environmentally risky site, of course. And this level 0 reporting is invaluable where reporting is suppressed, whether that be due to information blackouts or the incident taking place in remote rural areas because of its reliance on satellite imagery. Level 1 is a long list of identifiable incidents, which are translated into a detailed evidentiary dossier. It includes deep dives into social media, satellite data, and academic literature to calculate an actual environmental harm score. Sorry, that was level 1. And oh, forgive me, I've skipped my place. So level one, this is what confuses me. I think perhaps the Americans amongst us are more familiar with using level zero as the starting point, but in my head, the starting point's always level one. So yeah, I just skipped out that middle level there, level one. So level one is a long list of identifiable incidents, each subjected to verification and a magnitude assessment by triaging social media footage, testimony, and satellite imagery, producing an environmental risk score across 121 facility categories. And then we've got the depth, which I just went into. So you can see that they're increasing in the data gathered on a particular potentially environmentally harmful incident. So verification and transparency are absolutely central to WISN. Incidents are peer reviewed where possible and archived using something called a cryptographic hash, which just shows you that the evidence, let's say, hasn't been tampered with. Producing a tamper-proof record with entries assessed for uncertainty and bias. There is also an ethics of release. Publishing real-time imagery of partial damage risks handing belligerents actionable intelligence for follow-on attacks. So data is released with a deliberate time lag, 6 months in the case of Ukraine. And COPs are also explicit about keeping their approach people-centered with only limited and responsible use of AI. And these are precisely the features that my framework is designed to interrogate. So just moving on briefly to OSIHA, or Open Source Environmental Harm Analysis, which forms the methodology for my thesis. So OSIHA is a tool for evaluating whether and how open source methodologies can address those long-standing gaps in transitional justice, which include the marginalization of environmental harm and the invisibility of its victims. It operationalizes that evaluation across 3 interlinked categories. So across visibility and documentation, methodological integrity and inclusion, justice, engagement, and uptake. So the first category is visibility and documentation, and this is the chapter that I've just finished writing, and it was surprisingly hard to write. So the first category asks whether OC can detect and render legible harm that would otherwise go undocumented. Are these incidents geolocated? Are they time-stamped? And are there any spatial patterns? And can the method capture slow onset diffuse harms such as soil contamination, groundwater depletion, and the likes of vegetation degradation? And these are things that typically evade frameworks built around discrete acts of violence. And critically, are affected communities made visible, or is the harm abstracted into depopulated satellite imagery, stripped of social context? So those are key questions that this section is looking to answer. Secondly, we talk about methodological integrity and inclusion. This is a little bit more straightforward. So it's just about examining technical robustness and epistemic inclusiveness. So is there any systematic triangulation across imagery, data sets, social media, and field information? And are workflows documented clearly enough to be scrutinized and replicated? And is uncertainty and gaps in the data honestly addressed? So inclusion is a bit harder here. So open source information is often framed as democratizing evidence, but in experience, these open source investigations and open source information are oftentimes limited to, folks in the global north sitting in universities, very much removed from where these things are actually taking place. So that's a bit of a question mark. And so I need to ask, whose knowledge structures this evidence, and are effective communities and local monitors treated as evidentiary or mainly illustrative? And finally, I will look at justice engagement and uptake. So this is a forward-looking category. It asks whether OC evidence actually travels into truth commissions, whether it actually travels into criminal investigations, reparations, memorializations, and guarantees of non-recurrence, or whether it remains too technocratic a methodology and too out of reach. So that's the third category. So next steps, the research is ongoing. So I'm not, as I said earlier, presenting any concrete findings today. The next phase is the systematic application of OSIHA to wisen across all three categories that I just talked about, moving from descriptive illustration to critical appraisal, identifying both strengths and structural limitations. And the central question that exercise is designed to answer is this: is Wisen merely an advanced documentation platform, or can it function as an accountability enabling infrastructure? So, to conclude, conflict related environmental harm remains structurally marginal within transitional justice. My intervention positions systematic, transparent, scientifically grounded open source information documentation as a potential bridge between environmental harm and accountability. If that bridge holds, it challenges the historical relegation of environmental harm to the periphery of conflict narratives and helps expand transitional justice to meaningfully include the environment and the communities who depend upon it. So thank you very much for listening, folks, and I look forward to any questions you may have later on.
Great. Thank you so much, Lydia. Thank you for keeping to time. And I think your presentation, raised some issues which we're going to be discussing during the panel, particularly the role of different actors, the role of the people affected versus the role of perhaps observers, scholars in the global north. So I think you're setting the scene very well there. Thank you so much. Okay. Agnes, I'll invite you to present now and share your screen.
Yes, thank you. Just a moment. And I'll get that in. Does that look all right? Excellent. Yeah, thank you, Chris, for the introduction before, and thank you very much, Lydia, for a really interesting presentation. And I'll pick up on some of the concepts and ideas that you mentioned, because I'm going to go very much into detail with satellite remote sensing and how it can be used to detect specific environmental harms. And what I'll be presenting today are some of the findings from my master's thesis, which I very recently completed, though I'll spare you the technical details today. And my work is part of the Eco-Syria research project at Lund University, which explores conflict and environment interactions in North and East Syria. And my colleagues from the project will be presenting in person in Ottawa on the 18th, so I would recommend that panel for anyone attending in person. Part of the Eco-Syria project included the collection of household survey responses from farmers through a local partner organization, PEL Civil Ways, in 2024. And in my work, I combined these survey responses with an exploration of satellite remote sensing, of how satellite remote sensing can be used to detect this particular phenomenon that I'll be talking about, which are informal makeshift oil refineries in northeast Syria. And the reason I'm talking about this here today is that this phenomenon or infrastructure arose as one of the consequences of the war in Syria, and it has had severe negative impacts on the environment and on human health. And there's a need for more and better spatial knowledge so that we can quantify the effects and support environmental cleanup and post-conflict recovery. So first, I'll give a bit of context to the area as well as the concept of makeshift oil refineries. Syria is a minor oil-producing nation in terms of global production, but oil is a really important part of the national economy and the energy provision. The majority of the oil fields are located in the east of the country, as you can see on the map. And before the outbreak of the civil war in 2011, crude oil was transported from the oil fields in the east via pipeline to the two state-owned oil refineries in the west. But the civil war rapidly led to a landscape of fragmented territories controlled by different factions, and combined with war damage and lack of maintenance, it resulted in the collapse of the national oil infrastructure. I have focused specifically on Al-Hasaka, which is an oil-producing and agrarian governorate in northeast Syria. It's also the part of Syria with the largest Kurdish population, and the region has been under the governance of the Autonomous Administration of North and East Syria, also known as Rojava, both during and after the civil war, though, of course, in the past 6 months, things have been changing quite significantly as well. So it's in the context of this conflict and infrastructure collapse that makeshift oil refineries emerged as a small-scale and local informal infrastructure that enabled the refining of crude oil into usable products. And in Al-Hasaka, that was really important. It was essential for things such as farming machinery, as well as for heating in the winter. And journalists and civil society organizations have already documented that these refineries emerged around 2012, both in Al-Hasaka and in other governorates. And in its most basic form, they consist of a metal drum where crude oil is heated up, which is then cooled through pipes through a water basin. And typically they exist in clusters of multiple refineries in one area, which you can see on the image here. Reports have also documented the very extensive negative impacts on human health and the environment as a result of both the smoke and leaks and the oil waste produced in the process. One of the key reports on the topic was published by the Dutch peace organization PAX in 2021, and they estimated that 15,000 individual refineries have existed in Al-Hasaka between 2012 and 2021, and they mapped them to over 300 points representing refinery clusters using visual inspections of Google Earth imagery. One of the significant challenges with visual inspections and manual labeling is that it's extremely time-consuming. And Google Earth also has an infrequent and inconsistent temporal resolution, which makes it really difficult to map changes over time. And in many places, especially where I've been working, there's only one image available every few years, and a lot of the time the latest image is not particularly recent. So for this reason, it's desirable to use other kinds of satellite imagery, such as Sentinel-2, which Lydia also mentioned, which is from the European Space Agency, which is a widely used open access source of satellite remote sensing data. And as you can see here, it has a pixel size of 10 to 20 meters, which is quite a bit less than or more coarse than Google Earth. But then it has a much higher revisit time of around 5 days. And it also contains multiple spectral bands, which means that we can observe information that's not visible through regular color photos like those in Google Earth. And in my work, I think I'll skip to that slide a little bit too quick. In my work, I've developed a method that use Sentinel-2 data to detect oil refineries, specifically using two different proxies for the refineries. First, I use machine learning to map the oil-contaminated soil around refineries, which is visible. It's a visible and a long-term marker of that oil refining took place. And secondly, I used shortwave infrared data to detect locations with thermal anomalies, which can indicate that a refinery was actively in use. And by combining these two proxies, I was able to detect likely active refineries in 2017 and 2025. But more widely, it would be possible to map active refineries throughout each year of the Civil War and possibly at smaller timescales as well. So first, now I will show you the results of some of my detection of oil-contaminated soil. The maps you see here are showing that at a very small scale, oil contamination around refineries is clearly visible. This was more distinct around the refineries in the northeast, which is shown here, and a little bit less so in the south. In the light red color, we see soil or pixels that were detected as oil contaminated only in 2017. So those might be places where there wasn't much additional oil contamination happening after that time. Whereas in the dark red, it's new oil contamination in 2025, showing that we might have had new refining activity here. And then the bright red are pixels where contamination existed in both years. But what we don't know from this is, of course, the relationship between the time and detectability and how that changed, which would be really interesting to look more into. So beyond this part of the work, I also looked at the shortwave infrared spectral band. And I identified 4 different types of categories of hotspots in Alhasaka. And it turned out that hotspots from active refineries actually have a signal that's quite distinct from other categories that I've shown here. And by combining these 2 sources of information about refinery locations, I was able to detect 67 active refineries in 2017, which were spread over 6 sub-districts, both in the northeast and in the south. And then in 2025, I detected 17 active refineries, which at this point were almost exclusively concentrated in Al-Qattaniya and Al-Jawadiya sub-districts in the northeast. But what was really interesting, I think, was comparing these results with the household survey data that I mentioned earlier. We had one question from the surveys included a lot of questions, and I've been looking at a few of them. And one of them asked explicitly about the impact of the local oil industry. And surprisingly, a little bit, respondents from all over the governorate described that they had been impacted. And this contrasts quite starkly with the more geographically concentrated locations of the oil refineries that I detected, shown here, as well actually as other types of oil infrastructure, such as the oil fields and the oil pipelines, shown here. And some of the most commonly reported impacts were air pollution and then associated diseases such as respiratory and cancerous diseases, as well as damage to soil and crops. But I'm going to remove all the extra infrastructure so we can see the survey responses more clearly. I took a closer look at the responses because of some of these dissimilarities or divergences. And for this reason, I ended up creating 2 more categories. And with those, they show that responses which talked about oil impacts unprompted, and especially in relation to questions focused around changes in the soil, were much more concentrated in the same locations as the refineries I detected, and the same with the categories of respondents who named specific infrastructure. A lot of the time that was refineries, but it was also talking about specific leaks or oil waste. So here there was a much higher degree of convergence with the detected active refineries, especially in Al-Qattaniya and Al-Jawadiya in the northeast. But overall, the comparison, I would say, raised more questions than it answered. And one of the questions was also, how come that some respondents who are from the same locations report different impacts, sometimes opposing impacts from the oil industry? And it certainly showed me and my colleagues that there's a lot more to investigate here. Beyond this, it's very clear that there's a need for environmental cleanup of the soil and the water sources, since contamination is threatening the livelihoods of farmers in Alhasaka. Oil waste from past refining operations is also a problem which requires targeted action. We still don't have a good grasp of the spatial extent of refining-related oil pollution. No, not oil, air pollution. But the data indicates that this has been potentially really widespread and will require extensive health interventions. And then, of course, there's significant changes happening in the region as the autonomous administration is in the process of integrating its institutions with those of the Syrian government. And that's what I had to say, unless, how am I for time, Chris? Because I did have 2 more points if I had the time.
You have a minute, if that's okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's good. Then I'll just very quickly mention 2 additional unexpected findings that might be of interest to some people here. Firstly, I accidentally detected a lot of landfills with my approach, which wasn't the plan, but it might actually be really useful since landfills and also air pollution from burning waste has been named as a really big and increasing environmental problem in Al-Hasaka. But also on a more positive note, I detected a very sudden increase in solar panels that seemed to kind of occur from 2024 to 2025. And it's not just in urban areas, but also in the countryside. Interestingly, sometimes at the same locations where oil refineries were formerly located, we now have these solar panels. Which points towards that we might have some new developments in the energy provision in northeast Syria. But I'm really excited to discuss some of this in the context of the other presentations in a little bit. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Agnes. Very interesting presentation, and I think some clear relevance for questions of transitional justice, which were discussed in Lydia's presentation, for example, but lots of other things we can talk about as well. Okay, great. Armel, over to you, please. Feel free to share your presentation.
Yeah, I'll try to share it now. I think.
So we can see it. It's not yet in presentation. There we go. Okay, perfect.
So yeah, thank you very much, Chris, and really thank you for the previous presenter, because the tools that they are talking about is also some tools that will appear in our presentation as a tool for due diligence. As Chris was presented, I'm Armel Nganzi, based in Lubumbashi, and actually I'm working with Impact, which is a Canadian-based NGOs which work on mining governance, illicit trade, and community development in Africa and South America, where we do have an office there. I'm really glad to be part of this panel, to be able to share with you 10 years of implementation of due diligence in the Great Lake region, and really 10 years of lesson learned from us. But before I go through introducing this lesson learned, I would like really to give a small background on how due diligence came in a Great Lake region. So as most of you know, and some of you know, from 2010, the Great Lake region was really intensively under conflict, mostly in Eastern GRC, where we saw some moved population, but also some human rights violation that happening there. And beside of that, there is a lot of illegal trade, because those armed group that was in the country was taking over the mining site and really manage the whole supply chain. And at the time, there is no any framework. We remember that there is a Kimberley process certification scheme that was for diamond, but for 3Gs and gold, there is no framework. And that what was good in that one is that the response was quite quick. It's how in 2010 we see US took through the Dodd-Frank Act, the Section 1502 took some action against the illegal trade in the Great Lake region, and mostly on the Treaty G, where they request that all American company should demonstrate that they're not contributed to any conflict and the human rights violation. But beside of that, there is also a regional response that came into this, because the Great Lake region, the country in the Great Lake region, but besides OECD, came together and tried to reflect around a framework that can help to reduce conflict. And it's how we saw in 2010 the regional initiative against the illegal exploitation of natural resources that was adopted by the ICGLR countries, and also OECD due diligence guidance for responsible supply chain was also adopted and implemented in a region, beside also the launch of the regional certification mechanism that was with the OECD guidance. That was really the two tools that will lead the due diligence in the Great Lake region. So with this, but what was the principle of this framework that was set up? The principle, of this framework, I will start by the RCM, the Regional Certification Mechanism, but there is also the 6 tools that was decided, and the 6th tool was set as you can see on the screen here as like 6 items, let's say. First was the regional certification mechanism that we talk about in later. The second one was ISM formalization, that was asking all countries from ICGLR to push the ISM formalization. There was ITI implementation in the country, also harmonization of national legislation as a tools, whistleblowing mechanism as well, and of course regional database. And beside of that, there is also the adding value with the OECD guidance for supply chain that was established with the 5 steps that we talk about this later. And those 2 frameworks, the implementation of those framework was helped by the effort coming from the US government, the Canadian government, and the European Union as well. But also as a regional side, there is some country that institutionalize those framework into their national laws. The 2 countries that was really ahead of that was DRC and Rwanda, but up to now there is Burundi, Uganda, and Tanzania that really follow that. And for the implementation of this framework, we saw a lot of partners that came on the ground to help implementing those framework. We see in terms of tools, in terms of traceability and monitoring solution, we saw ITSCI, and we saw better mining that was supported by zero traceability at that time. Those are really the two lesser organizations that came with tools to help implementing those framework. And then you have some partners that came to help the countries to implement those partners through the funding coming from US, Canada, and European Union. And you can see those partners where Impact was part of as well. But the question is how those framework works, how those framework are able to, let's say, solve conflict or bring a solution into this. The objective of the framework was to ensure that minerals entering into global market are conflict-free, respect human rights, and comply with national law through responsible and transparent supply chain. And we can talk about those two schemes. So let's talk about the RCM first. The RCM was set on 5 steps. The 5 steps, the first one was the mine site inspection and validation, which is one important step, because you have teams with let's say with private sector, with NGOs, with partners, go on the site and check the site with some criteria, which is security, access, legality, and transparency, to see if those mining area fulfill with those criteria, then they get label green, yellow, red, and letter blue. And also there is, after the mindset is validated, you have implementation of the chain of custody itself. But for this, it's really linked to the OECD guidance implementation as well. So we'll see it later. When you have this and you get the mineral, you need to have those minerals certified before he leaves the country. That's part of the RCM. And then it's associated with, at the end of the year, with independent third-party audit, which is also linked to the OECD guidance itself. The fifth one, which is a regional database, was not quite working, so I will not really focus on that one, and we talk about it later at the end of the presentation. And then we have the framework, the OECD due diligence guidance with the 5 steps that we all know. Establish a strong management system, having risk identification and risk mitigation process, having audit, and also reporting what you are doing with in due diligence on your supply chain. That as a framework that was set to make sure that the conflict, the mineral exploitation is not linked to conflict. But those are frameworks that was set on the paper, but how this impact on the ground, and this can be implemented on the ground. On the ground, let's say when it came to establish a strong company management system, this means that there is some investment into traceability mechanism from the company, but also into his own management system, management procedure. So this is something that there's a lot of speech around that, because this brings some expense to implement due diligence for those stakeholders on the ground, and also need some technology. We saw the remote sensors where we talk about later. On the mine site inspection and validation, there is also need from the countries to put in place some structures, because the goal of the mining site inspection is really for the demilitarization of the mining site. So there is some structures, there is some less institutionalization of the process that was put in place. So it's really investment from the country. On the risk management and mitigation system, the main 2 things that we can focus on is really the technology that was put in place to identify. And then, in the previous presentation, we saw how technology was used to produce data. That's the same exactly that we did here. Technology also was used. EPIS was one of the structures that used a lot of imagery for conflict resolution and conflict risk identification. But also there is also establishing in a country some structure of conflict prevention and resolution. And in case of GRC, we can have the CPS, CTS, CPS, which is a Comité Provincial de Suivi, which is committee that bring private sector, government, and civil society together to discuss about risk and what happened on the ground and try to find a solution. So those are the things that need to be put in place to have a great implementation of those frameworks. And also those frameworks require a continuous improvement, which means you need to train people and build their capacity, and continuous building capacity. You need to have infrastructure also, and also you need your law and framework to adapt, continually adapt. One example of this, it's really from the RCM, we go from 3 criteria, let's say 3 label to 4 label because of the condition of the site. So we add, after like 7 years of implementation, we had the blue label on the RCM framework. So that's something that it's led by due diligence implementation on the ground. But what's the result that we got before we conclude to that? I mean, some of the results that we have into implementation of the due diligence on the ground is that, as I was saying, mine site validation is really the start of the process where we demilitarize the site and we legalize the site, let's say. And with this process of validation of mining site, we really increase the production. And we can see here, the example is that we have increase of tin from 2040 to 2024. We have the production of volume of production of tin go up to less than 7 times. And this is data coming from the Ministry of Mine. And I don't put here about the tungsten also, it's 15 times increase of that. And you can see the number of revenue generated by the government here on the screen. And the question that we can ask ourselves is, does this stop conflict? I mean, putting due diligence in place? We can say yes, because we see here, we can see the data that we have on the presence of armed groups in on the mining site. You can see from 2009 to 2020 how this has been reducing. But this is not only the only results we have. We have also a result in the reform. We see how country adapting the mining law to strengthen the mining law and regulation. We see how country was investing into creating some structures to track those armed groups with new mining police. We have a lot of capacity building that was conducted. I mean, in DRC, there is more than 50,000 people that was trained throughout the years. So you mean that, it's a sustainability or knowledge in the country, but also there is a structure of conflict resolution that was established. And those structure was really working. We have a conflict resolution on that time. Stakeholder got together and discussed how we can reduce conflict, but also those structure was helping to develop some infrastructure with the money coming from the exportation of materials. But with the result, we need to step back and say what works and what doesn't work. So what worked in our view is that, we were able to build a long-term capacity through continuous training. We established an effective conflict prevention and resolution mechanism through CPS and CLS. The scaling up of due diligence implementation across supply chain was quite easy into this. There is an implementation of really robust traceability system. Actually, we are able to duplicate traceability system on 3TG. And also, in these 10 years, government really get ownership of the due diligence. Now, all government know that it's due diligence is necessary for the mineral exploitation. But what doesn't work in our view? We see there is a limited data availability and transparency. There is insufficient harmonization of process across countries in ICGLR country. There is an irregularity in implementation of due diligence in business, downstream, upstream, midstream. There is some lag into those insurance system. I think there is some need to improve it. And also there is no coordination in the regional level for information sharing. And the last but not the least is this is top-down approach. And to have ownership, we need to have approach that's really coming from the field before it be implemented. So to finish, what are the perspective of due diligence on our view? The perspective for us is really expanding now due diligence with coming of critical minerals is really expanding due diligence beyond conflict risk. It's really adapting due diligence to multiple commodity as well. As I was saying, there is a conflict-free, there is a critical mineral that is coming, so maybe we need to switch and adapt to those commodity. We need also to make sure that due diligence is also applied and adapt to ISM, so ISM can implement fully the due diligence itself. We need to improve the data, and I think those two presentations can really help improving the data through technology and science. We need to that traceability and transparency all over the supply chain. We need also to enhance accountability. I mean, we need to make sure that those supply chain have an impact and positive impact on the community where those minerals are mined. And the last one is really we need more research on due diligence. I mean, scientific evidence, scientific data. We need thesis. We need a researcher to come and really have. I think this will be maybe the next project that we have. It's really to have really a study on scientific study on this due diligence process to make sure that this can be adapted to another community and we know where the gaps are and to improve this. So thank you very much. So it's a conclusion that we have here is that due diligence need really not only to work around that, but we need all to make sure that we have doing to coordinate effort, government, industry, civil society, international partners, and to make sure that we contribute to local development and we go beyond what is expressed in due diligence. Thank you, Chris. I think I go over the time for a bit, but yeah, ready to.
But that's fine. Thank you so much, Armel. Thank you so much for that presentation, and you made some important links to the other presentations as well. So thank you for that. Okay, without further ado, Emily, over to you, please, for the final presentation, and we should still have some time at the end for questions and discussion with participants. So those of you online, please do prepare your questions. We'll have those to discuss in about 15 minutes, okay? Emily, over to you, please.
I thank you so much, Chris, and I am thrilled to be here. I am disappointed to not be joining everyone in Ottawa, but I'm thrilled that I had the opportunity to still talk to everyone today. I will probably take fewer than 15 minutes because my discussion today is not so much a reporting out of a specific research project, but rather an introduction to an initiative that my organization, the Alliance for Peacebuilding, is currently working on. So the Alliance for Peacebuilding, just to give you a quick introduction, is a membership-based organization that has almost 300 members working across 181 countries. And we have a four-pillar approach. And so these four pillars are what underlie this initiative that I'm working on. So that's looking at collective action, which is speaking on behalf of our members, policy and advocacy, which is both domestic here in the US and global, research and evidence, which is the pillar that I'm the director of, and building narratives, which really is focused on how the public and others understand the concepts of peace building. And so our idea, our mission in a sense, is that no single organization can solve complex violence alone. And so with this in mind, last year, in the face of very steep cuts to the humanitarian development and peace building setting, we went about starting an initiative that we're calling Building Peace Economies at Scale. Everyone has heard of a war economy, and we are trying to turn the conversation to a peace economy. And so for the purposes of this conversation, the connection is really focused on different ways that environmental peace builders can be engaging and building their relationship with the private sector. I know that this is not something that necessarily comes easily to peace builders, and that the connections are not necessarily as immediate, but that there are, what I will argue today is that there is not only a fairly significant path for environmental peace builders to engage the private sector, but as we look towards the sustainability of the environmental peace building field and the peace building field writ large, that increased engagement with the private sector is in fact necessary. And so, this year, in the past 12, 18 months now, we have faced massive global cuts to ODA and further reductions of international development. And in the face of that, we are seeing that new research has shown that there has been a 5% increase in armed conflicts in the 2025 calendar year, which resulted in 1,000 additional conflict deaths in that year alone, in a year-over-year study between 2014 and 2024 and 2025. And it also showed a 12% increase in armed conflict and a 10 to 14% increase in militia violence. And these were really focused on areas and regions that had a high dependence and relationship with USAID. But there is opportunity in crisis. Traditional 3 to 5 year grant funding models weren't working for everyone as it was. There is now space to really imagine and reimagine the financing future of the peace field. And the private sector, multilateral development, impact investment, and venture capital haven't been systematically engaged by environmental peace builders up to this point. So from the private sector's point of view, there is a huge draw to building relationships with peace builders. The private sector is increasingly going to be operating in unstable environments, especially as we face the effects of the cuts from the last year. And businesses need that stability for operations in increasingly fragile settings. And for every $1 spent in conflict prevention, we know that saves up to $103 in humanitarian and security costs. So the Business and Peace, or the Peace Economies at Scale initiative is so far a coalition of 150 plus experts and practitioners across the peace building, finance, development, and policy fields. And our goal is to help make peace and especially environmental peace building a measurable and investable outcome. To date, much of the impact investing in this space has really focused on health indicators and in some ways environmental or climate adaptation or management indicators. What we are arguing is that peace needs to be unsiloed from these relationships and really integrated into impact investment at the most basic level, so that we can reframe peace building from charity to a smart business, strategic risk management, and protect markets, reduce uncertainty, and enable business growth, while building peace and especially addressing environmental issues. So what does this look like in practice? One of the major efforts that we are working in is convening conversations where we can start speaking in a common language and building standards and metrics that appeal to both peace builders and investors. Both fields have a huge base of metrics and indicators to work from, but they often don't align, or people don't know that they align because they're often called different things. The next thing we're doing is building the evidence base, which is really trying to coalesce a lot of the data that already exists on projects demonstrating their return on investment and the impact of peace-focused investment. There is a lot of good data out there, and there are a lot of good examples, but they aren't standardized, and they are often only reported back to their investors or in many cases the donors, and we're not seeing that information then feed back into the public space. And most importantly, this initiative is really focused on building partnerships, building those bridges. We're hosting learning engagements and convenings to connect private sector capital with especially local peace building efforts. So what does this look like, and more specifically for environmental peace builders? I think there is a huge amount of space for grassroots work and investment capital to work especially in the space of the public good. So there are many, many examples of environmentally targeted impact investment. For example, the microgrid solar panels that have been put together by the organization Nuru, which is working almost exclusively in Eastern Congo, Eastern DRC, and have successfully built an electric grid out of solar panels for three of the major cities in Eastern Congo. And in doing so, we're able to connect their towns to things like streetlights that increase safety at night, things like being able to access the internet, being able to connect to the other communities and early warning networks, all of these things that require electricity. And so we do see there are ways that the environmental peace building aspects are coming through in this impact investment space. Nuru was able to succeed through a series of both microloans and then building out through subsidies and loans from the IFC. And this whole concept then of blended finance, being able to build a project that is both environmentally friendly and reducing conflict and building social cohesion in those spaces. We don't have metrics, and the company never intentionally sought metrics for how it built social cohesion or how it reduced conflict or reduced violence in the villages and the cities that they were able to connect to these grids. And so that example doesn't get cited as an example of peace building, despite the fact that the evidence is very clear that it is. So building a resource repository where a lot of these cases and this evidence can come together is one of our main goals for this year, to start to connect those case studies for replicability and scalability across a variety of landscapes, geographies, and populations. This, of course, has a deeply inherent gendered lens. As we all in the environmental peace building field know, it is essential to integrate women into decision making, especially when it comes to things like food security, especially when it comes to things like deforestation for charcoal use and for cook stove use. So we see a huge opportunity for things like solar grids to then have these environmental impacts that then reduce issues like deforestation. So there are several different key intersections between private sector investment and things that businesses want to engage in and that have a return on investment, and the private sector opportunities through impact investment and through things like venture capital, especially in small and medium-sized enterprises or SMEs. So I think that there are, I could go through a host of case studies, but recognizing that we only have about 20 minutes left in our session, I would like to invite all of the attendees and, of course, all the panelists, anyone who's interested in learning more about this initiative. I don't think I can put the link in the chat to go to everyone. I think the chat only goes to the panelists. But it is on the Alliance for Peace Building's website. The initiative is called building peace economies at scale. And you are more than welcome to email me. My email is emily@allianceforpeacebuilding.org to connect if you are interested in learning more about case studies or if you are interested in connecting with this initiative. So thanks.
Okay, thank you so much, Emily. Fascinating. I hadn't heard of that Nuru project. Fascinating case study, and thank you also for kind of setting the scene a little bit more in terms of the financial challenges and the broader kind of political challenges right now in terms of peace building, conflict resolution, humanitarianism, international development, you name it, right? Most of the things we want to do are more difficult now than they were a few years ago. So thank you for raising that, but also putting forward some innovative means to address those challenges. So thank you. I see that already we have one question specifically for Armel, and it looks like Armel is tackling that question in the Q&A. So I'll let him do that. I do have a question for everybody, but I do invite all of the participants who are online, like the audience members, to drop some more questions into the Q&A box there if you'd like. In the meantime, I am going to ask a question for all the panelists, and if you want to, we can go perhaps in the same order that we just took the presentations. So my question really is about open data, transparency, and I think all of you mentioned these kinds of issues in different ways, right? So Lydia, for sure, there was, in your framework, you kind of address transparency quite directly. I think Agnes as well, you talked about like who has access to this kind of information, and I forget which one of you it was, but you were talking about, like, I think it was Lydia talking about like a time delay, an embargo basically on data, right? So you don't actually increase the risks in the field. Armel mentioned that one of the least successful aspects of the due diligence frameworks was this kind of mining database and a broader repository of information. And Emily as well, you mentioned, the importance of different actors speaking to each other and the different metrics. And it strikes me that, for the private sector, certain forms of information are very strategic and, are usually held confidential, right? It's very important, especially thinking about the mining sector, for example, geological information, other kinds of information can be kept, by these big corporations. And then on the other side, when we look at conflict, there are multiple sensitivities, right? So my question for all of you, starting, I guess, with Lydia, is, what do you see as the kind of promising aspects of maybe the technology and the innovation that you're talking about in terms of openness and transparency? And then what are some of the perhaps risks or constraints that are involved? I was a bit long-winded there, but I hope you guys grasped my question.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Just to start, I suppose I think that when I started doing this open source work, it was a few years ago, and I think that I was very, aspirational and assumed that open source information, which, as I said earlier, includes like social media, remote sensing, etc. I assumed that this could solve all our problems, which is classic. When you're young and you get a new idea and you just run with it and you get very excited. But over the last few years, as I've been doing work with the Digital Investigation Lab at Queen's and then progressing my own thesis, I am again just questioning the role of this. I think open source information is critical in illuminating certain events that otherwise would be unseen. But yet at the same time, it's not like a silver bullet to cure or to solve all our problems. I think the conclusion I'm coming to in my thesis is that well, it's not really a conclusion, but is that no one of these, like, not only open source information is going to solve the problem of conflict related environmental harm and accountability. It's just not, it can't. Like, for example, one of the things that is really bad at documenting is like changes to wildlife, and like I don't know, species decline, because you can't, in the vast majority of cases, remote sensing or like satellite imagery isn't going to tell you that, and certainly social media isn't going to be able to tell you that. So that harm, that particular aspect of environmental harm, will remain unseen. Well, if we rely exclusively on open source information. But at the same time, I mean, some of the work that the organizations I mentioned, such as Forensic Architecture and Bellingcat, are doing, it's so impressive. The Forensic Architecture did a fantastic report on, like, they produced a cartographic map on environmental destruction in Gaza, and it is just beautifully structured, and they actually use a blend of resources, or a blended methodology. So yes, they use open source information, but they also use information from those who have been affected on the ground. It's a more comprehensive picture, which is why it's so important, and so useful. But I suppose as well, I'm sure Agnes will maybe be able to relate to this, being the remote sensing wizard. But like, I remember, so the Conflict and Environmental Observatory have been asking for student volunteers to look through satellite imagery to flag where there is a potentially, something that has been attacked in Ukraine that could have environmental implications. And these are students, yes, they're geography students, and they've done, courses in remote sensing, but to leave them in charge, basically unsupervised, of doing that work on a voluntary basis, feels slightly irresponsible. And I mean, that's also coming from me, who has been a student volunteering to do this type of work. We receive training, but I don't know, something doesn't quite sit right with me in terms of like us saying definitively something has happened when I'm just a PhD student in Belfast. What do I know? So that makes me slightly nervous. We're not experts, and I think lawyers like to think they know everything. Lawyers do not know everything, and in fact, we should consult more with our friends in the sciences and geography, etc., so that these information pools don't get siloed. But yeah, that's a very waffly answer. If anything else comes to me, I'll circle back around. I always think when you're the first one to answer a question, you're like, "Duh," and it takes a wee minute. But yeah,
that was a good answer. Yeah, you spoke to the question. Thank you so much, Lydia. Agnes, you were referenced also in that answer. Go ahead and give us your thoughts, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So clearly, with my work, this aspect of ensuring openness and transparency in the data has been pretty central in my decisions of the data that I used. Also in the programs that I used to a degree. I used Google Earth Engine for processing and doing a lot of my spatial analysis, which means basically the code can be copied and someone else can run it, and you can run it on new data sets, and it's really easy to share. So I think there's definitely potential there, and one of my next steps will be looking into how my findings can be shared with people who can make more use of it and develop it further. But it's also made me think the process of, for example, using Google Earth Engine. A very specific challenge there is the risk of, we get these new tools, and Google Earth Engine is free and available for researchers at the moment. But they're like, we have cloud computing, we can do more and more stuff, but I think there's a risk that we end up relying on these systems, which then at some point might be paywalled and people are shut out of it, or I ended up relying on methods that used a lot of computational power that then suddenly Google changed how much I could do per month. And then suddenly I couldn't do that analysis. So I think, yeah, like there are barriers even in the positive developments that are currently happening. So that's one aspect of it. Then I had this thought, I'm trying to figure out how to really connect it here or where it came from. I think it has to do with what Lydia talked about both just now and in her presentation, that there's a lot from me as a remote sensing scientist perspective. It is so important to remember what we can't see. And I think in my field, now having gone into a very natural scientific department, I can really see that it feels like a big disconnect between how we do science and the conclusions we think we can draw from the data, and then everything that's missing. And it's so much, and it's hard to see if you're not thinking about it. And it's one of the reasons I was really excited to incorporate the survey data, because I really think that it shows how much we can't see from satellites. And I was really inspired by the field of critical remote sensing, which has been sort of things have been happening in that field, I think, in the past like 10 years. And I think that's extremely important. As we get more and more access to the data and the tools to analyze it, I think it's just super important that we also keep the critical thinking about how we're using it and who gets to use it as well. That would be my answer.
Thank you so much. Great insights there. I was taking notes. Thank you. Armel, do you have any thoughts on data openness, transparency, and regional certification mechanisms, etc.? You're muted.
Yeah, I was writing my response, so I didn't get the question. Can you just resume a little bit? So
No, I'm muted. Sure. You mentioned that one of the challenges in the due diligence systems was the databases, the kind of trade information. What do you see as the issues around openness and transparency in these due diligence systems? Perhaps do you see it as a technical issue, or is it sometimes an issue of ownership of data and political sensitivities? Can you talk a little bit about that? We're close to running out of time, but we have a couple of minutes perhaps for your
sorry,
response.
yeah, I think it's mixed of everything that you just mentioned right now. I mean, there is a lot of sensitivity of data. I mean, talking about the mineral sector itself, I mean, we are talking about business here. We are talking about a lot of investment. So there's also la security, country political sensitivities. So it's really difficult for company of a country to share data, even in Great Lake region, in the context that we know. We know what happened with the neighbor country here, so it's quite difficult and really sensitive itself. I will say technology, of course, access to technology, as just Agnes mentioned here, is not always easy in the sectors. But for me, I will really mention that access to technology, let's say, can also bring the risk of having not reliable data. As you know, you will have less number of data coming in. You will have less possibility of crossing data. Then you will have like weaknesses of your data, and then you will not be able to go into your conclusion. So that's for me really the points I can raise. But not to complete Agnes is that even we are doing scientific study or whatever, I think this is really important for bringing models, for implementing on the ground. But to really confirm and having model works, it's really always good to cross it with field study and field survey and really confirmation on the ground. So yeah.
Great insights. I'll just quickly say that in the Q&A, we have a question for Lydia and Agnes about changes to soil quality and things like that in conflict situations. So either of you or both of you, feel free to take a look at that one in the Q&A. Emily, would you like to answer the kind of question about data openness, transparency, etc.?
Yeah. So, I mean, as I said, this is something that, is a huge problem across the field. And it's not just the data transparency of, what the results are, but kind of how people got those results. One of the knock-on effects of having a peace building, environmental peace building field that is dependent on grants and donors is that there have not been a huge number of there's a disincentive to report when findings are not what you thought they would be, or that the study did not go the way you planned it to go, or the program didn't go the way you planned it to go. And because of that disincentive to report that, we are finding that there are methodologies that are being repeated that were not good methodologies the first time, and they're not good methodologies the second time. And so there is a lot of space, I think, for some more of the scientific method, I guess, of acknowledging failures and not framing them as failures, but rather as data points and necessary data points. And so I think that part of the problem of all of this data transparency and sharing the indicators, sharing the methodologies does come down to people replicating programs that are ineffective or inefficient, and that there's a lot of space for us to be boosting better programming and using the limited funding that is out there in the best and most efficient way possible to help the most people.
Great. Thank you so much. So we're almost at time. I will encourage people to put any last questions maybe in the Q&A. I see that Agnes, thank you for answering the question. And I see that Emily also shared those links she was talking about in the Q&A as well. So have a look at that if you're, I'm sure you are interested. I just wanted to, I won't try and sum up what's been said because a lot has been said, but it struck me that although this is a panel on innovative approaches and lots of, important new perspectives and new technologies in some ways were shared, I think all of you in different ways talked about the importance of, triangulation, so different methods, and what we might see as fairly, I won't say traditional, but fairly established methods such as, whether it's surveys, whether it's field visits, multiple forms of evidence being used, even though these some of these approaches are kind of new. So that's one thing. And I appreciated that nobody was, really looking at technology as the answer, right? Technology is part of the answer, but certainly it's not a silver bullet. And I just wanted to also say that, a few of you, Armel and others were talking about, and just now, Emily, you're talking about kind of scientific methods and the importance of rigorous scientific methods in, gathering data and making sure that lessons are learned properly. And Agnes, I think as well, possibly Lydia mentioned the importance of kind of, critical approaches, critical theory essentially of things like remote sensing as well. So I think these are two takeaways. But I really enjoyed the way that the case studies played into a broader discussion of the kind of time that we're in right now, and the opportunities as well as the challenges that we're all seeing. So we are at time. We're at 2:30. I just want to finish by thanking everybody, especially the four panelists. Thank you so much. Really excellent work. And thank you also to the participants online. Thank you for the questions and the Q&A. Enjoy the rest of the virtual day. And I hope to see some of you in Ottawa next week. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Chris.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Bye. Thanks.
Bye.